Hello, everyone. I'm Gideon Ruhara, co-founder and CEO at Lantern. Thank you to everyone who's joined us so far and everyone who's still trickling in. Today's webinar, the new roles of AI search on what gets recommended and why, with none other than Zach Chahalis from iPole Rank.
Hello.
How are you doing, man?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the time. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I understand you're traveling a bit, so really appreciate you making the time.
Last week was a little hectic, but I'm happy to be home.
Yeah. I think you can take it from here, Zach. I'd love to maybe you can start with a bit of an intro and then on who you are, why should people care about what you have to say, and then we can go into the deck.
So I am Zach Chahalis. I'm the Senior Director of SEO and Data Analytics at iPole Rank, little known agency. So I lead up the day-to-day strategy development and execution for all of our relevance engineering, SEO, GEO efforts, especially on the technical side and analytics side, and developing the overall holistic strategy and working with our content teams. Based in Atlanta. I've been in the SEO space now for about 16 years almost. And yeah, I've got two dogs that you might see pop up behind me at some point during this conversation. And yeah, that's me. Cool. Let me go ahead and pull up. All right. Is that sharing? I think so. All right, cool. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the new playbook for, I'm calling it GEO content, pick your acronym of choice here, for 2026, and essentially how your brand gets chosen as the answer. So I'm going to run through a little bit in terms of what things are looking for within the AI platforms, classic search platforms, and then of course leave some time for Q&A and then kind of continue into some of the conversation between Gideon and I. So we already talked a little bit about myself. Other thing I'll mention here is I am recently married, a little over 2 months now. I think I've only lost the wedding ring like 4 times, so that's a good start for 2 months, I guess. But some promise there. So a couple of things we'll chat through. How does AI search actually work? The GEO selection funnel, why content might be winning or losing, turning those insights into action, reframing GEO as a content strategy and not necessarily just a tool set, scaling visibility with omnimedia and semantics, some case studies, and then some wrap-ups next up type of thing. So the way that we've been looking at it, and the way I like to think of it, is that traditional SEO ensures that your site is discovered, but GEO AI search, again, pick your acronym of choice here, ensures that your site is understood, that it understands what it is, what you do, what you sell, who you're talking to as a customer. But let's talk about how this actually works. So AI search requires a multidimensional approach to how you need to think about things. Essentially, it's not a single ranking contest for a single query like it was in the 10 blue links type of way. It is a multi-stage process in which your content is competing at dozens of different points in a branching and multimodal retrieval process. So things like fan out queries, for example, is looking for breadth and depth of content. And then the synthesis aspect of it means that your content's being judged on how extractable and readable it is, and not just the relevance that it has to a particular keyword or target phrase. And when we think about the content that we need to be looking at, really where your opportunities are won or losses is your content matching the routing profile that's expected for the types of content in a particular area. So for example, if someone's looking for API documentation, it's expecting an API friendly format, transcripts, more documentation around how something should be organized, but it's expecting multimodal parity around the type of content that's being sought after, as well as supporting details and data points, things like structured data, transcripts, etc. So a good example of this being kind of in the realm of finance. So like I mentioned, there's the API example, but if I'm thinking, hey, what is the best high yield savings account in 2025, 2026, I might be looking for something like a comparison chart around things like interest rates or fees that might be accompanied within that particular savings account aspect. I might be looking for user generated content around people's experience with the bank or with that particular account type of offering. So making sure that we're aligning the right type of content, because that GEO selection funnel is where things start to be determined why your content is winning or losing, and you need to make sure you have that right type of content that takes place there. So as we think about selection for synthesis, it's really that relevance to the subquery that's coming in and taking place. The suitability of your chunks of content to be lifted and recombined and integrated are key, and you need to make sure that it can do it effectively without introducing any types of errors, formatting issues, or incoherence, things that don't make sense within the answers that are being spit back out if you're a user within that AI platform. So that extractability is really your first gate. If that chunk cannot be cleanly separated from the surrounding content without losing that meaning, the odds are it's not going to be selected for synthesis. And that's where even good content that does talk extensively about a topic may not show up well in AI search because it's just not satisfying the need that takes place from the ability for it to be extracted. And it's also looking for elements of verifiable information. It's basically kind of saying is, okay, now that I can extract this information, the evidence density or how much verifiable information that's in the content, does it tie into what I'm seeing on these other sites that I'm looking at on the same topic set? Because it doesn't necessarily want to surface information that heavily disagrees with the overall cohort set, unless in some cases you're looking for something that is defined to be unique or something that goes against the grain. So it's looking for clear citation information, it's looking for clear data, and not burying something within storytelling. And that's where something like the scope clarity and applicability starts to come into play. You want to make sure that as you're talking about and structuring the words in your content, that you're selecting phrases and word choices that are clear about what makes sense in the particular instance. If it's not clear under the conditions on which something's taking place, the odds are it's not going to be selected. So, for example, this works for many people. This is an approach that's suitable. Does not mean anything at the end of the day. Like, I'm not actually saying anything that's very clear about what I'm talking about, right? Versus something where if I'm talking about an article about running, I'm stating a date on the left-hand version. I'm talking about beginners. I'm talking about their skill set of running. I'm talking about how far they can run. I'm being very clear about the types of content or what I'm talking about or what this article is referring to. So that
Yeah.
helps a lot, as well as things like authority and corroboration. So making sure that it's factoring in, are you a site that makes sense to be talking about the topic set? I don't want to pick on any sites that are out there too extensively, but for example, if you're a site that's heavily focused on your product offering is SaaS productivity, task tracking, task keeping, and you start having content on your site that talks about the best restaurants to eat at in the state of Minnesota, that's a big area, by the way, you're not going to be trusted in that sense because you don't have the authority to be talking about that particular topic set. And I'll be clear, there is a site out there that's doing this and it's not working for them. But that's the type of thing that's being sought after. You look at something like, and I'll hat tip to Will Reynolds on this one, but like he's talked about the idea of like Michelin and the Michelin star ratings, right? Like that's a tire company, rubber company at the end of the day, but they have
Yeah.
built up the authority on this topic set that allows them to be known in this space and talk effectively about those things.
Zach, if it's cool with you, I'd like to interject on something you mentioned,
Do.
the semantic chunking, right
Yep.
before, slide before. So does this mean that you, right
This
after,
one.
yeah, right there. Does that mean that you should treat, sorry, the one with the yellow,
Mm,
no, I think you're going way farther. You're right there.
okay.
So does that mean that each paragraph, while it is part of a larger piece, has to be, treated as a complete piece on its own?
Yes. And I go a little bit deeper into that too. You know, if you're mixing topic ideas as you work through a larger paragraph, it hurts in a wide variety of ways. It hurts in the user experience, it hurts in the extractability, it hurts in the mathematical, like semantic similarity scoring of your content. And it's just a wide variety of ways where it makes the experience a little bit more ineffective, but specifically for users. So
Got
yeah,
it.
I mean the way that you're organizing your content on the page is vital. Yes.
Makes sense.
Um Another piece to call out is that freshness and stability matters. So a couple things to know: if you're not actively monitoring this, the training data that's being used in a lot of AI platforms is anywhere from 6 to 18 months out of date. And again, I hate cherry picking and making fun of certain ones, but last I checked, I believe Gemini was still January of 2025 as their training data, and they have access to a lot more fresh information. ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, hovering around the January of 26 range right now, meaning if it's looking for something more current than what the training data has to offer, it's going to start looking from the RAG pipeline perspective, and then it's looking for freshness signals that exist out there. How frequently is your content updated? When was it last reviewed? When was it originally published? It is looking at that information because, in the sense it needs to go and find something more current than the training data, it is looking for those signs and signals and dates around how current and fresh your content is. And then a big call out here, just kind of finally, like, health and safety filters do matter. I know I'm saying a lot of things around don't do, but if you write your content as don't do, like a negative perspective on it, like avoid discussing something, it's actually something that can trigger the harm and safety filters and can hinder the ability for your content to be extracted. So frame your content in more of a positive manner. That is more likely to not trigger these health and safety filters, and more likely to improve your ability to be selected. But let's talk a little bit about why good content might get excluded in this particular sense. So we're going to be jumping into turning some of these insights into actions and how you should structure it. And this is where we'll talk a little bit deeper about that extraction funnel and the idea of chunking organization. But essentially, you want to make sure that you rethink how your content is organized and structured on the page. A single long page might need to be redesigned in chunks that are more easily extractable, and organizing your things or your content in like single ideas or thoughts that go throughout the page. This is kind of a good example or visual getting of what you were just kind of asking about too. Like, if I have this piece on the left where I'm jumping in between, and yes, it's in random Latin placeholder content, but if I'm jumping in between different topic sets, it's hard to piece together where I continue to jump back and forth between topics. So, like the yellow content piece, for example, versus if I organized it on the right, where I had four more cleanly organized thoughts or ideas around a piece of content. And this is where, like, passage optimization, like an actual thought exercise, comes into play. I've kind of hit that point in my age bracket, I guess, where, like, I've started to cook more and smoke meat and do these types of things that I guess become stereotypical when you become middle age. At least for me in the States, anyway. But if I'm thinking about the idea of like a cooking recipe, and I know there's always the joke that, like, no one wants to see your family's life story about the recipe before they actually get to the recipe. And that is kind of true. I mean, don't get me wrong. Hey, if you have a background to it, great, but include it in the right spot within your content. But if I'm looking at something on, hey, I've never cooked a steak before. How do I cook a steak? What type of steak should I select and cook with? What are the steak seasonings? What are the ingredients of it? Organizing your content that goes back to these types of fan out queries that may exist around the topic set allows your content to be selectable, but also to support the fan out queries that are going to be chosen and included in the response, whether that's an AI mode, an AI search platform like a ChatGPT or a Claude, or something like an AIO. So being able to answer that effectively and having your sections of your page tied back can be very valuable. But chunking is about improving your user experience at the end of the day. And to me, it's not just an exercise for crawlers. There's been a big debate about this within the SEO, GEO space for the last 6 months or so. But to me, I think this articulates it very well. This was a case study that Cyrus Shepard published years ago, before the idea of chunking was even talked about. And the general idea is he had the content piece on the right, which was just this wall of text. And it had this content piece on the left where it was broken out into organized sections, included images, included more interactive elements of the page. Which one are you more likely or more wanting to interact with at this point? And his case study kind of showed, in this case, people spent almost 4x the amount of time on the page because the page was more enjoyable, was a better user experience. Which one's more likely to perform better in this particular case, mainly just from the user perspective? So let's actually look at an example of this. I always love putting this on a slide because absolutely no one wants to read a wall of text like this on a PowerPoint slide. And I think that kind of articulates my point here. This block of content talks about the idea of machine learning and data privacy. And if I look at the cosine similarity scores to the focus keywords, they score okay. I really kind of want to target around a zero point 0.7 to 0.85 range here. And we're not far off from that. But no one wants to read something like this, especially in a highly technical format. So if I were to break these up into two individually organized chunks, the odds are this is more readable and digestible to the person that's coming into the page. So it makes it a lot more likely to improve things like nav boost from a classic search perspective, signals that are going to indicate this is a good experience. But at the same time, my cosine similarity scores are actually improved by almost about 0.12 on a basis perspective. This content just is a lot more organized, a lot more likely to be selected for synthesis, and makes content more digestible in a complicated sense. So there's a wide variety of tools out here that help in this sense. Definitely Lantern is certainly an area to jump in and start to evaluate how you can potentially look at some of the aspects of improving your site with the agentic standpoint. I'll also note we actually have a tool out called Relevance Doctor that allows you to score your passages to see where maybe you're hovering below where you should be performing in ways that you could possibly break out your content more effectively. But this is where I want to reframe GEO, AEO, LMNEO, P, again, pick your acronym of choice, as a content strategy and not just a tool set. Our approach of looking at content is that we want to break down how we improve and iterate our content. It starts with auditing our content for AI readability, extractability, looking at things like the semantic and latent intent research that exists behind it, thinking about how we can restructure and augment our content for AI and classic search, and then testing and iterating our content with AI simulation. I think that's the thing that sticks out there the most. Is one of the biggest elements of AI is that it allows us to actually see the models that are being used in these particular different AI platforms and test how our new content might perform in those models compared to what we had before, or test and iterate as we go through something. And so when we think about understanding the gaps in our content, how I like to think about it is one, start by pulling your rankings, your landing pages, your visibility in the different AI platforms. So leveraging something like Lantern to be able to see your visibility in something like ChatGPT. Looking at things like generating your vector embeddings and scoring and finding the most relevant passages that you have on your page and comparing those to the vector embeddings for the citations that do exist or appear competing against you. And then identifying how you can improve the relevance of your content across your pages, across the sections and chunks of your pages, based on the relevance opportunities that exist out there that other folks are taking advantage of. And then understand what those fan out queries are. Understand where you have gaps in your content, in your narrative that maybe are being leveraged in something like an AI overview or an AI mode or the different AI platforms. And that way you can understand what types of content you should also be including in the user intent behind it. So we have tools like Qforia that we have available that allow you to be able to see this, but also understand that routing format that's expected, meaning that content modality type. And that way you can understand what type of content is most likely to be selected for the phrase that you're going after. Is it an image gallery? Is it an article? Is it a comparison piece? And being able to see that, that way you can structure your content accordingly. But now let's talk a little bit about the idea of scaling that content from an omnimedia perspective. So this is where I mean the omnimedia aspect of things is in 2026, content is not just an article or text content that appears on your site. It is all the different types of content modality that exist out there, depending on where your brand and your company needs to exist. So that could mean a podcast, it could mean videos, it could mean textual content, it could mean images or social media, but understanding the types of content that you need to have on your site. But this is where elements that we've talked about for years still come into play, but from a slightly different angle perspective. I don't want to say it's just SEO because it's not. It goes beyond it at this point. But something like user-generated content is still valuable and necessary just from a different angle. If you're thinking about a query or a prompt in an AI search perspective that involves troubleshooting, product comparison, your experiences, I'm currently in the middle of planning my honeymoon, for example. Like, I want to know what I should go to and look at in the area that I'm going to. User-generated content, forum discussions, this is extremely valuable content to return in these instances. And the odds are something like a Reddit, a Quora, a YouTube are more likely to be selected as a citation source than other sites that may come across as inauthentic or unreal. So it's trying to look for those used shared experiences that exist out there. It also wants to see entity-rich embedding-friendly language. So this is where you want to be very clear on the terms that you include in your content. Don't be very vague about the terminology you're using. Rather, define the entities, like I pull rank as a brand or Nike running shoes. Leverage structured data. I think this has been an odd debate for me to follow in the SEO space for the last year on, do LLMs respect structured data or not? They can and they do. They do read structured data, but they also leverage structured data as a part of RAG pipelines. Both Google and Bing have come out saying that their respective AI platforms, Gemini/AI mode and Copilot, do read and rely on structured data to heavily populate the information that exists in there. So use the entire schema.org vocabulary. Don't just use ones that drive rich snippets. Think about structured data as a way of taking your content and your entities and explaining this to any crawler at an elementary reading level. I like to think of it as taking a Shakespearean novel and distilling it to a reading level that's like a 6-year-old or 7-year-old could understand. It's trying to make it simple and more easily digestible. So don't neglect your structured data, and in fact, like go beyond what's just in Google's documentation for rich results. This is where like a debate around FAQ schema is still enjoyable to me because yes, Google has deprecated the rich result, but it is still valuable in improving comprehension of a page through structured data markup. And then make sure you understand it and factor in things like semantic triples. This helps to clearly articulate what version of an entity that you're talking about and how it ties into something. So, for example, if I say the word apple from an entity standpoint, am I talking about the fruit? Am I talking about the company? So, being able to use something like a subject, predicate, object to say I'm talking about the company Apple allows the system to more clearly understand what the content is about and not that I'm talking about the fruit version of it. And this is how you can use those semantic triples in your language. Don't do something like the pros of buying a lake house are many, because that's so vague and not clear. Do something like a lake house provides weekend relaxation and rental income potential for homeowners. It includes that subject, predicate, object, and makes it very clear what I'm talking about and who I'm talking about it for. And try to also provide unique, specific insights or information that exists. This is where look at the thing that makes your company or your brand unique, or the data studies you have, or the data that's available in your backend to try to improve the likelihood that your page is selected and cited as an authority within RAG pipelines. So I used to work in the real estate space, for example. The amount of data I had around things like how much rent would cost in a particular city, that set me apart from other folks that didn't have that data. So use it to your advantage. But again, avoid that ambiguity. Be very clear about the things that you're talking about and be very straightforward in your sentence to remove the noise that exists there. And just to kind of wrap this up in a nice bow, like doing this has a positive effect. This is where like case studies come into play. And these are things that we've done to actual major brands, Fortune 500 companies in the United States, where we've done this with them. And we've been able to grow things like your visibility in ChatGPT and AI overviews, but also has a positive effect on your classic search performance too, which you can't neglect. I mean, there still is a heavy amount of volume and traffic out there in the classic search realm. So don't abandon the old for the new, but you can optimize for both through the efforts of relevance engineering and the idea of trying to build relevance around your brand and your product offerings. But another good example of this is we work with a telecom brand here within the States. And in this particular instance, they wanted to grow their AI search visibility and classic search visibility. And we work with them to do this through the idea of content engineering. We help to do all the things that we talked about. We turned all their content into mathematical formulas, looked at the things like the cosine similarity scores, the vectoring of the content, the internal linking approaches. And we backed into how do we make this content more effective while also improving things like technical foundations. And in this particular case, we were able to take their AI overviews from 712 to over 3,200, but that represented a 253% growth in visibility and a 1.4 million net new impressions that they didn't have prior to doing this effort. So again, even though we're in more of a zero-click era of AI overviews and AI mode, I'd rather be present and visible and get my name and brand in front of folks and start the conversation as they're at the top of their conversion funnel and work it down until they get deeper into it. So just a quick wrap up and next steps here. And I want to share this with y'all, but this is a quick assessment flowchart of how you can look at your content to say, do I need to rewrite this? Do I need to improve it? And how can I take a look at doing it better? So just a quick takeaway that y'all can use in order to perform a little bit better from your content perspective or see when you need to start thinking about things. If you're struggling with understanding how AI search works, we do have an AI search manual that's available. It is 24 chapters of everything that you need to know about how AI search functions, including a TLDR in case 24 chapters scares you off for reading it. But you can access that here on the iPoll Rank site. And again, feel free to reach out to me for questions or anything that you might want to learn a little bit more here. But with that, thank you. I'm Zach Chahalis, and I'm going to turn it back over for Gideon and I to chat a little bit more.
Amazing presentation, Zach. I really loved that. I also learned quite a few things. I liked when you touched on the semantic triples. That's not something that I've had before. So thanks for that insight. Yeah, I'd like to pass it on to the floor. We do have a few questions that people did turn in before the webinar. I'd love to know if anyone who's tuned in has a question. Maybe as they're getting those in, I can get us started with the first one. So yeah, if these AI models are prioritizing UGC in the form of Reddit, or and etc., what does it look like for brands who don't have an active presence on those sites? Is it seeding communities? Is it responding to threads? What does that look like practically for brands?
Man, we've gone 33 minutes without me saying it depends. It does heavily depend. If your company relies heavily on those types of platforms, or there's a point in your customer journey where folks are looking in these types of things, Reddit, social platforms, things like that, building the right community, it can be extremely valuable here. Because what I've seen is it can be very quick for these platforms to pull from, I'm going to say Reddit in this particular case. And if the sentiment isn't positive, there's a strong chance that it could actually take you out of the consideration for the customer before they even go further down into that conversion funnel. A good example in my prior life in real estate. So the brand I worked with, we were getting outranked by a query of, does it cost anything to list my property for rent on this site? And it was being outranked by a Reddit article before it even got to us. And you look at something like that kind of going like, okay, cool. Not only we're not in control of this query anymore, it's actually giving incorrect information because it was saying that it costs money to list a property when it didn't, at least to a certain threshold. So we went through and we corrected it. And, this is where having the community building aspect can come into play too, because having the right community, folks that back your brand, folks that like you, want to talk about you, they can go in and kind of fight those battles on your behalf. Because the second that you show up as a brand in some of these conversations, depending on the context, it actually might hurt you because folks don't want to see the brand kind of looking like they're trying to advertise in that sense. But having the right community that can say like, no, that's not right, that goes a long way. But at the same time, make sure you're building the right social community for your brand, for where you're operating, for the type of product that you're offering, and understand where it doesn't make sense.
Got you. I think we just got a question. Someone's asking, given how opaque the systems are, what metrics should we be reporting to clients?
That is a good question. Yeah. So I like to look at reporting in 3 pillars now. One is scoring and evaluating my content on my page. That is where like the relevance engineering, scoring, and metric comes into play. I highly recommend, as an opportunity, when you get a moment, look in the webinar section of the iPoll Rank site. In fact, I'll go try and grab that link for you. But we did a webinar on how we look at scoring content, on-page things, for example, something like entity density or information gain scores. And that is the first pillar to me, is how do I score my content on my site? How do I score my site as a whole? How do I think about ways of improving my experience, my engagement values? And that way I can get into the realm of nav boost scoring and making sure that I'm providing the best experience that's out there. But the webinar that we did talks about the metrics that we have identified and developed. I'm going to go and drop that in chat for folks now. But it also talks about how we think about scoring this content and whatnot. That's my first pillar. My second pillar is looking at things like the visibility components of your site. This is where you need to understand your visibility in prompts in platforms like Lantern and kind of looking at, hey, am I visible in ChatGPT? Where can I be doing better? Who is visible here? Starting to think about the sentiment of things. I would say not ignoring the visibility from a classic search standpoint. It's still important. Don't get obsessed with daily rank tracking. I highly recommend please don't do that. But like it is important to look at those classic search rankings and understand what's there from the RAG perspective. And then it transitions into the actual performance metrics that we should be looking at. So I am also an analytics implementation person. I'm not going to say expert because I hate the word in that case. But like when I think about analytics implementation, a big component comes down to is understanding what folks are doing once they get into your site to the best that you possibly can. Privacy limitations, depending on the country and depending on states that you're functioning in the United States, for example, may impact your ability to measure here. But ensuring that you have a properly set up analytics implementation is key. I want to know things, for example, like default channel groupings in Google Analytics or Adobe. Don't tell me about AI referrers effectively. And honestly, default channel groupings in GA4 are wrong in many instances. There have been many case studies out there about that. So, for example, creating a custom channel grouping that looks at all of the AI search refers and creating a channel that reflects folks that are coming in from that source. More effectively, you can now also see folks that went from, like, let's say ChatGPT to website A to your website and start to follow that chain through. So you can understand the refers that are coming in there also. Making sure that you understand the events and what folks are doing on their site. Where are they clicking? Where are they going? Where are they staying? Do they bounce? Do they leave? And then understanding the conversion metrics that matter to you. So if you're an e-commerce brand, for example, am I adding something to a cart? Do I go into the checkout? Do I go through the full checkout funnel? Do I make a purchase? What do I buy? What's the revenue that comes out of that? Having all these metrics defined as you go down through that waterfall, you can start to work your way back up to say, hey, from an attribution standpoint, now I can start to say, I have folks coming in, prompts that are related about this certain topic cluster set. They're coming in here. Thankfully, beyond platforms, I mean, like what Lantern's doing is phenomenal. I am also thankful to see Google and Bing finally actually sharing data on something. That has been something I've been begging for the longest time, and was beyond excited to see Bing announce it. And I think Google felt maybe a little bit of pressure to finally start sharing it too.
For sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And now it's starting to flow out there. It was only in the UK announced last week. I'm now seeing it flow into other profiles that are not UK. It's slow, but it's getting there. Understand where folks are coming in and the queries they're looking for. It is also possible in platforms like Google Search Console to filter down to the prompts that are taking place there. You can apply filters that remove like shortened terms or below a certain word count or things like that. And you can actually get a better understanding of the longer term phrases that are out there, because the data that's from AI mode and AI overviews, it's mixed in there. You just need to know how to filter down to it. So if you can start to piece together how folks are coming into your site, what page they're going to, what the sources are from, then you can start to get deeper into that funnel.
Yeah. Speaking of metrics, Zach, I do have a follow-on question of my own. Going from ground zero, doing nothing for G or AEO to actually seeing a lift, what are you seeing with some of the brands you're working with? How long should they expect before they can see any lift? Yeah.
That's a challenging question. The reason I say it's challenging is it depends. I know it's probably going to turn into like a drinking phrase. If you are trying to target being in the training data and something that doesn't rely on the RAG pipeline, you're honestly trying to optimize for 6 to 8 months from now, when these platforms have their rolling switch over to a new data point or a new model comes out that requires them to go into newer training data. So like I said, if ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, I think they're all January of 2026 right now. You're you're behind. If you start optimizing now, it's June 24th. You may not see the impact of that until the beginning of 2027 and some of that. Now, with that said, you can see things a lot sooner. I have been able to experiment with changing content on a site, or folks have done multiple case studies on like LinkedIn Pulse and doing all these different things that might matter there. And, sometimes you can see something appear within the next day within an AI response. So it does depend. It does depend on, the industry you're in, the site that you are, what you offer, how you're approaching it, where you're posting and fixing things. Um, but it could be quick and it could be long. And that's where I like the idea of relevance engineering, because in theory, you're optimizing for both classic search and AI search. The idea is building your relevancy across the internet. You're not just targeting GEO only, or again, pick your acronym.
Right.
So if you can improve your classic search performance too, you're seeing other benefits there also. I've been able to see a lot of sites that have grown visibility in both and traffic in both. And as much as folks are saying, hey, traffic's disappearing from the internet right now, I have multiple clients and sites that I work with right now where traffic is up because we're creating new content that matters and that's useful for their customer base, and they're coming in. Those case studies I shared both represented about a 6-month to 12-month range, respectively. There were two case studies. One was 6, one was 12 months. You can see it start to scale pretty quickly in both of those examples. It does depend, and it does depend on how you approach it. And I hate to say scale matters, but it does. You can create a content generation pipeline entirely via AI, and it could spit out crap, or it could spit out something good if trained the right way and measured the right way and audited and edited and reviewed. And you can have that start to come up pretty quickly. I just did a presentation at a conference called SEO Week that I pull rank host back in at the end of April. And my entire study was around, I picked 3 sites that were based on AI slop. And I looked at how they had the AI mountain effect. They had a nice big spike in visibility and then fell right off. And of the sites I picked, one was, and I alluded to it earlier, a website that is focused on productivity and task management that just published junk for the sake of publishing junk. And they had a very clear AI mountain. And then they had a very clear fall off where their visibility is actually 10x worse than it was before they started doing this effort. And then I had 2 other sites where they took the right approach of doing it, making sure that the content was aligned with who they are, what they do, that's useful for the user. And I can tell you it's AI generated. I know the folks that are running these sites, they didn't experience the AI mountain. Well, let me rephrase it. They experienced the upward portion, and they might have leveled, but they're not dropping because they created content in the right way. So there's a heavy it depends to this, but you can see it pretty quickly if you do it the right way.
Gotcha. Right.
Yeah.
Next question with Q&A. So if AI search tools, and I guess this could be answered by scale, I guess. But if AI search tools are already trusting well-known brands and sources, how can a new brand with no authority still improve its visibility GOAO?
Honestly, very good question. So I'm experimenting with this now, and I hope to maybe come back, get in, talk with you in a couple months after I see the results of my experiment. But I have passions, if you can't tell from my background. So I've been creating some, I'm going to call them AI slop websites, but trained on relevance engineering metrics, trained on how to look at content gaps and opportunities, and then bulk creating content in the right way for those particular areas. So in that sense, I'm trying to build EAT. But I'm trying to build EAT in a logical way. It's not fully published yet because I'm experimenting with it, and I don't want you all to go out and try and find it right now. But like the goal is for it to actually list me as an author and build up my authority on those topic sets. It's not SEO oriented, but it's like hobby oriented. And what you're really trying to do is you can create the right content scale, but you need to support it with the right activities. Create content that ties into your brand, what you do, that adds value. Understand what folks are not talking about. That's what I mean by information gain, and talk about those things. But find new ways of interjecting into the conversation. But try to show your expertise in an area. That's where I like something like taking your data, if you have something available to you, or running a data study or a survey, or if you have a community, ask your community about things. But being able to take that unique perspective that ties in there, it is possible to build a brand from scratch and build the EAT component in the right way that makes you actually valuable. Please don't try and manufacture EAT as a BS thing. I mean, like, I'm talking about actually building EAT, using and I know eat might be open to debate too, but like using your knowledge base, your skills, your experiences to try and build something that matters here. And the other thing too is you can try and tap into experts or folks that are in your industry or space that have this built up credibility and authority. Can you get them to come in and author content or review content or um, I want to be very cautious with how you might approach guest blogging, but like get folks to come in and write about things that are going on there. That's a big opportunity for me. Like even you see it in the SEO space all the time. Folks are going out and writing for other sites, or I work with a site in the finance and real estate vertical recently where like I was trying to bring in an expert that mattered in that particular realm because it helps give more credibility initially that you are talking about something of value. Layer that in with the right technical approaches, layer that in with structured data that builds the right knowledge graph around your entities, your brand, who's talking there, and you can start to build the stuff up. I'm not going to tell you it's going to appear overnight, but like put the right work into it. I'm not saying you need to work night and day to do it, but just like put the right effort into it and you can build something reasonably quickly. And by quickly, I mean start to appear within weeks, months, depending on how you approach it. If you're publishing an article a day and you're trying to build a net new brand and new site, it's possible it can ramp pretty quickly. If you're doing it one a month, it's not going to. Like there's a heavy it depends here.
Yeah, yeah. I have a question of my own, Zach. Given
Yeah.
the experiments you've run at iPullRank, and especially with the lift in AI search visibility, are you seeing a correlation between that and a drop off in website visits? Because that is a question that I have had from brand: is should we be afraid that showing up more will lead to less sales?
This is a hard one to answer because in theory there's somewhat anecdotal like components of this. If I am searching for what your brand might appear for, and I get an AIO, and I'm ranking number 2, number 3, maybe number 1. There's a strong chance because we've seen the increased percentage of zero-click searches. I want to say the last SparkToro one I saw said something like 65% and counting. That's a lot. That's basically saying 65% of people that see a result do not do anything, meaning they got their answer right then and there. But with that said, if you think about how the SERP has evolved, the 10 blue links of old, yeah, they still exist, but they're in different formats. I've actually seen as few as 3 blue links appear on a page before. So I would rather have the content that has me appear in an AIO or in an AI response if that's where my customers are, because more than likely that is probably appearing towards the top or middle portion of the funnel that they're in. And either that's indicating, hey, even if they clicked into my site right now, they might not have a high propensity to convert. They may not be valuable traffic at the end of the day. So what I've actually seen happen is I've seen sites where the visibility grows, but their traffic falls off, but their conversion rate goes up, their revenue goes up. Essentially, because they're educating more portion during the different elements of their journey, when they actually come into the site, they're more likely to buy or submit a lead or whatever it is the action that you're looking to take at that point. I do see traffic fall off in instances where, like, let's say you've maxed out your traffic content potential, short of an expansion, acquisition, something like that, and you might see less traffic. But at the end of the day, I highly encourage looking at your conversion metrics and going, are we getting better traffic coming in? Do they have a higher propensity to convert? Are we getting more value per visit for what's coming in? There's certainly a question mark here, right? Because if I'm in that top funnel and I just answer the question and they never come back in, did I add any value? This is where it's hard to answer without the right attribution model and conversation in place. I, for example, work with a home builder where every person that comes in, they ask how they heard about it. I know folks in the agency space where they're asking, like, hey, how'd you hear about us? And, unless they're answering truthfully or answering at all, you might not know in some cases that they started their journey here and they came back in. Most browsers are deleting cookies instantaneously, or at least within 7 days. You may not be able to track multi-step journeys in an analytics funnel anymore. So trying to get the context on where did they learn about you, that might be a good question for folks that are in your conversion funnel, but you
Yeah.
might not have a pure answer there. That's where I just like looking at those deeper metrics going, okay, how is this hurting my bottom line? Am I getting the right folks in the door?
It's really. I like how you broke that down. Just one more question, but it's more basic. How different is GEO from traditional SEO today?
Honestly, I like that question. So, Delphine, good question. So, I am in the it's not just SEO camp, but you cannot ignore SEO. That is why I like to refer to it as relevance engineering. Because in theory, you're modifying your site, your content, your experience in ways that affect both. But it's worth noting that the systems, and I'll say GEO to represent AI search, SEO to represent classic search, look at different things in slightly different ways, and that may impact the nuance in how you think about it and how you optimize something. I will give two quick examples. JavaScript. So if JavaScript is heavily involved in your site rendering, I will put Google at a sixth or seventh grade reading level for my US folks based on like tier, but let's call it like a year 6, year 7 for more international.
Yeah.
They're they're getting better. I see them being able to render things client side and see it, but it's not perfect. And in instances, I see some stuff doesn't show up, and I've experimented with pre-rendering sites, and I see massive spikes in visibility. And like it matters when you make sure that's still visible for Google, but it's better. Bing struggling a little bit more. I maybe put them at like kindergarten, first grade. AI search crawlers do not render JavaScript at all, with the exception of Meta. And I mean, no shade to Meta, but like that's not a platform folks are heavily using right now for AI search. So if you want to appear and your site is an Angular-based platform or JavaScript-based framework and you're not pre-rendering, you're not doing the right things to make sure your content's visible, the odds are that these AI crawlers come in from a training data perspective and they see nothing, or they see a fraction of what is existing on your site, whereas Google may get more. And in that sense, you have removed the ability for these AI search crawlers to extract your content effectively. The RAG pipeline may still benefit you. Again, if Google can see it, maybe you can get around it if it's a RAG pipeline search, but you're hurting yourself there. Site speed is the other example I will give. So I am firmly in the camp that site speed is not a ranking factor. 6, 7, 8 years ago, yeah, maybe, when Google said everyone should fix their site speed. At this point, everyone has milked site speed as a conversation topic that I don't think it's a ranking factor. I have experimented with this. Yeah, you could improve your site a couple seconds, but I don't think that's the true effect. What I think is actually the case is what I mentioned earlier is nav boost signals. And Google talked so much about this in the US monopoly documentation. But they are using Chrome user experience data to say whether a website is a good experience or not. And how they measure that, I think that's still open to interpretation and conversation, but components of that include, do people bounce from your site? Do they click on different things? How long do they hover and stay? How long do they stay on a page? What do they do on your site? Do they convert? Things like that factor in. So if site speed is slow, then your bounce rate is likely to be higher. Your conversion rate is likely to be lower. Folks don't want to stay on a site that takes too long, especially if you're on one of these things. So in that sense, site speed is an indirect factor because it's there. And I believe the last study I saw, was it the usual yearly ranking factor study, put nav boost in the top 5. And I will agree with that based on things I've experimented with. So nav boost is big. Site speed is a fraction of that as a domino effect. Now, on AI search, it matters entirely differently. If your page takes more than 2 to 3 seconds, I like to say 2 to 2.5 seconds to load, I am now seeing in a lot of server logs, and I recommend looking at server logs regularly with your site, an increase in 499 status codes. Now, that is not a clearly defined status code that you're going to see if you just search for status code lists. But the 499 status code are AI search crawlers looking at your site saying, this took so long to load, I got bored and I left. So they're getting whatever appeared to them within that 2 to 2.5 second range. That might be nothing, that might be a fraction, that might be everything. So in that sense, site speed actually matters deeply, because if the crawler is not seeing the content because it took so long to load, they're leaving the site. They're losing trust. They're not coming back as much. And I actually have a direct correlation study that we've published at iPullRank where we saw a large spike in 499s, a large drop off in AI search citations. We fixed the speed problem. They came to us because of that. And then suddenly it flip flopped. AI search citations skyrocketed, and actually were above even the prior point before the site broke. So there's a major component there, but it's a slightly different nuance. The last quick one I'll throw in is meta descriptions. Meta descriptions don't matter for SEO. I think we're all hopefully in agreement with that, with the caveat being it matters for click-through rate, which again matters for nav boost and other signals and things like that, but it's not a ranking factor. When AI search crawlers are looking in the RAG pipeline for what sites to search and value and return in citations, what it sees in that SERP snippet, that is your advertisement to them. So they actually do look at a meta description. They do look at a URL structure. Is it clean? More than, let's say, the classic signals do. So we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of these opportunities that matter. Just there's different nuances into how these things work. That's why I want to say it's not just SEO, and there are other factors or considerations that need to take place that make it a little bit broader than that. And I think don't get me wrong, there's elements of classic SEO in it, but there's just different ways of thinking about things. And that's just a fractional example of things that we're looking at on a daily basis here.
Got you. Speaking of being in agreement, Zach, again, being in a pretty new space comes with a lot of everyone having an opinion on AI search and how to actually win visibility. What's something you've seen that you don't agree with at all? Something you're not in agreement with?
All right, there's two ongoing debates, and I kind of talked about them a little bit in my deck. One is that structured data does not matter. I've heard structured data does not matter at all anymore. I've heard structured data does not matter for AI search crawlers. It does. There have been multiple case studies that have had this proven. I really don't want to cite names, but I highly recommend searching for folks that have done some of the studies on structured data and LLMs. And originally some folks were saying, no, it actually doesn't based on my data, only to come back a couple months later going, oh, it actually does. And they were able to prove it. Now, does it see everything? Does it interpret it the right way? Open to interpretation. I will argue the same thing with chunking. Google firmly came out and said, please don't chunk. It doesn't do anything. But that implies a specific reason for chunking, that you're doing it for Google. And don't get me wrong, we're in an industry that's entirely designed around manipulating crawlers and bots, and folks will take that to an extreme. So some people are doing it for that purpose. Instead, think about it as improving the user experience. And that's where I think the chunking debate, I actually usually have slides in this deck if I was presenting it that's kind of like chunking is a scam. And I know Mike King has also used that too. It's not, because you're making the user experience better. Think about how you can do something like that. That's where it matters the most for me. The only last one I'll throw in is LLMs.txt. There's a lot of debate on this. There's been a big case study from Ahrefs where they made cats.txt and it did the exact same things. But with that said, both Claude and ChatGPT have now come out saying hey, we actually do look at this. Google's talked about it a little bit more. I have not been in the favor of LLMs.txt in the past, but now I'm at least starting to experiment with it. Doesn't mean I'm using it, but I'm experimenting with it to see if what these platforms are saying actually is real.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that. It's actually one of the first things we built at Lantern was LLMs.txt. Yeah.
I do see it starting to have an impact, and when it's done in the right way. I actually had a client the other day where, hey, we have an LLMs.txt file. Cool. Well, your robots.txt file blocks anything that ends in .txt. So you do, but you don't. Again, it depends. But I think in done the right way and thinking about how you do markdown files the right way and wanting to support that, I think it can work very well, especially in instances where your site may be very JavaScript heavy and maybe it makes sense to have markdowns and your LLMs.txt file could lead to that. There could be certain value depending on where it makes sense for your business.
Got you. All right, Zach, I guess we've just clocked time. What's your closing note, man?
Think about things holistically. Do not abandon what is working in classic SEO, but think about how you can effectively optimize for both, because it can be done. That is something that we've proven here at iPullRank in both technical and content, is you can improve your value for both and thinking about the idea of relevance engineering and not just trying to target one or the other. But like, don't get hung up on shiny object syndrome with AI search. At the end of the day, I'm still seeing it not exceed 1% of total traffic coming into sites. And that's because a lot of folks are getting their answers, or a lot of the users of these platforms are doing it for generation of things. But it doesn't mean we should not pay attention to what's going on in these platforms. I want to own all of it. I want to be visible for my clients and my partners wherever they may want to be and where their customers are. But don't abandon the old in favor of the new. Think about how you can do both.
Amazing. I love the closing note. All right, guys, that's it for us. For everyone who has joined, we will be giving a 7-day free trial access to Lantern. Zach, thank you so much for making the time. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks for having me. Awesome. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Cheers.